Everyone in the mansion laughed when Tasha Brooks dropped something, but none of them knew that one day she would become the only person brave enough to do what they would not. The Moretti estate sat on nearly 20 acres outside Chicago, a place where polished marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and every room seemed larger than most people's homes. Employees moved quietly through the halls, guests arrived in luxury cars, and important conversations took place behind heavy wooden doors. Yet among all the people who worked there, nobody attracted more attention than Tasha Brooks. Unfortunately, it was rarely the kind of attention anyone wanted. Tasha was 27 years old, hardworking, kind, and hopelessly clumsy. During her first week, she accidentally knocked over a vase while dusting a bookshelf. During her second month, she dropped a tray of sparkling water in front of several business guests. By the end of the year, nearly everyone had a story about something Tasha had spilled, bumped into, misplaced, or broken. Most employees were polite to her face, but the jokes never stopped. Some called her Butterfingers. Others referred to her as the walking disaster whenever she was out of earshot. Every time laughter followed one of her mistakes, Tasha simply smiled awkwardly and continued working. She never argued, never complained, never defended herself. That only seemed to encourage the teasing even more. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, several household staff members gathered in the service kitchen preparing for an upcoming family celebration. The Moretti family would soon arrive for a birthday dinner honoring Vincent Moretti's mother, Eleanor. The event was one of the most important evenings of the year, and everyone felt the pressure. Tasha carefully carried a stack of folded table linens across the room. Halfway to the dining hall, one corner slipped from her arms and landed on the floor. The reaction was immediate. A few workers sighed dramatically. Someone laughed. Another employee shook his head. "There she goes again," he muttered. Tasha bent down quickly and gathered the linens without responding. Her cheeks turned red, but she continued working. From the far end of the kitchen, a gentle voice interrupted the laughter. "I do not see anything funny." The room immediately grew quieter. Standing in the doorway was Eleanor Moretti. Though well into her 70s, she carried herself with quiet grace and dignity. Her silver hair framed a warm face marked by kindness rather than authority. Unlike many members of the Moretti family, Eleanor treated employees as people rather than background decorations. She walked over to Tasha and helped her pick up the remaining linens. "Thank you, ma'am," Tasha said softly. Eleanor smiled. Everyone drops things sometimes. The simple comment seemed to embarrass several people in the room. Eleanor handed the linens back and gently touched Tasha's arm before leaving. Tasha watched her disappear down the hallway. A faint smile appeared on her face. Moments like that were rare. Most people saw her mistakes. Eleanor seemed to see the person behind them. Later that evening, after finishing her duties, Tasha carried a tray of tea toward the private sitting room. Through the partially open door, she spotted Eleanor sitting alone beside a window overlooking the rain-soaked gardens. The older woman appeared tired. Without thinking, Tasha knocked softly and stepped inside. "Would you like some tea?" she asked. Eleanor looked up and smiled. "That sounds wonderful." As Tasha poured the tea, the two women spoke for several minutes about books, weather, and family traditions. It was nothing extraordinary, yet it felt genuine. Outside, rain tapped gently against the glass. Inside, the mansion seemed quieter than usual. Neither woman realized that in just a few days the entire family would gather under the same roof, and a single moment during that celebration would change both of their lives forever. Over the next few days, an unusual friendship continued to grow in the quiet corners of the Moretti estate. It was not the kind of friendship anyone expected to see. Eleanor Moretti belonged to one of the most powerful families in the city. Tasha Brooks was a maid most people barely noticed unless something went wrong. Yet whenever their schedules crossed, Eleanor always made time to speak with her. Sometimes it was only a few minutes in the garden. Other times it was over tea in the sitting room. The conversations were simple, but they became the highlight of Tasha's week. Eleanor asked questions nobody else bothered to ask. She remembered details. She listened. One afternoon, while arranging books in the library, Tasha heard laughter behind her. Two employees stood near the doorway watching her struggle to balance a stack of novels. "Careful," one of them said with a smirk. "If Tasha drops those, we might need a construction crew." The other laughed. Tasha lowered her eyes and continued working. Before she could respond, Another voice entered the room. Or perhaps we could simply help her. Both employees immediately straightened. Eleanor stood nearby holding a small gardening basket. The room fell silent. Without another word, the two workers stepped forward and helped carry the books. After they left, Tasha shook her head. You do not have to keep rescuing me. Eleanor smiled warmly. I am not rescuing you. She carefully placed a book on the shelf. I am reminding people to behave better. Tasha could not help smiling. That evening they sat together in the sunroom overlooking the estate grounds. Golden light streamed through the glass walls while distant workers prepared tents and decorations for the upcoming birthday celebration. Family members would begin arriving the following morning. Luxury vehicles would fill the driveway. Important guests would crowd the dining hall. Eleanor watched the preparations with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said quietly, large family gatherings are not always as pleasant as they appear. Tasha glanced toward her. I thought everyone would be excited. Eleanor laughed softly. Families are complicated. Something in her voice suggested experience rather than humor. Tasha looked out across the lawn. I never had a large family. Eleanor turned toward her. Then perhaps you are luckier than you realize. Both women laughed. Yet as the laughter faded, Eleanor's expression grew more serious. There are some people coming this weekend who care more about money than relationships. Tasha listened quietly. One of them is my nephew Derek. The name seemed familiar. Tasha had heard employees mention him before, usually not kindly. Is he difficult? Eleanor paused before answering. He believes everything can be controlled if enough pressure is applied. The response lingered in the air. Before Tasha could ask another question, Eleanor changed the subject and began discussing books again. Yet the warning stayed with her. The next afternoon, the first guests arrived. Expensive cars rolled through the gates. Staff hurried through the mansion preparing rooms, meals, and decorations. Voices echoed through hallways that had been quiet only days earlier. From a second-floor landing, Tasha watched the family gather below. Among them stood a sharply dressed man with a confident smile and cold eyes. Several employees immediately lowered their voices when he passed. Tasha did not know much about Derek Moretti, but she noticed one thing instantly. While everyone else greeted Eleanor with affection, Derek looked at her as though she were standing between him and something he wanted. And for reasons she could not explain, that realization made her uneasy. By the evening of Eleanor Moretti's birthday dinner, the mansion seemed to pulse with energy. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the grand dining hall, while servers moved carefully between tables covered in white linen and silver place settings. Members of the Moretti family filled the room with laughter, conversations, and carefully practiced smiles. At the center of it all sat Eleanor, elegant in a deep blue dress, greeting relatives she had not seen in months. Tasha spent most of the evening moving quietly between the dining room and kitchen, delivering dishes and refilling glasses. As always, she tried her best not to draw attention to herself. Unfortunately, that rarely worked. While carrying a tray of desserts past one side of the room, she accidentally brushed against a chair. The plates rattled slightly. Several guests immediately turned toward her. One cousin chuckled. Another rolled his eyes. Some things never change, someone muttered. Tasha lowered her gaze and continued walking. Across the room, Eleanor noticed everything. She gave Tasha a reassuring smile that eased the embarrassment almost immediately. It was a small gesture, but Tasha appreciated it more than anyone realized. As dinner continued, conversations gradually shifted away from family memories and toward business matters. Tasha noticed the change almost immediately. The atmosphere became heavier, more serious. Derek Moretti, seated only a few chairs away from Eleanor, seemed especially determined to dominate every discussion. He spoke confidently, interrupted others frequently, and carried himself as though every decision already belonged to him. Several family members appeared uncomfortable, yet few challenged him directly. The longer the evening continued, the more obvious the tension became. At one point, Derek began discussing future control of several family properties. His voice remained polite, but something beneath the words felt sharp. Eleanor listened quietly before offering a different opinion. The room grew noticeably quieter. Derek's smile faded. For the first time all evening, irritation appeared on his face. Tasha happened to be nearby refilling water glasses when she noticed the exchange. She could not hear every word, but she recognized the warning signs. Eleanor remained calm and composed. Derek, however, seemed increasingly frustrated each time she disagreed with him. Around the table, several relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Nobody wanted conflict during a birthday celebration, yet nobody seemed willing to stop it either. Vincent Moretti had not yet arrived. Business obligations had delayed his return to the estate, and everyone expected him later that night. In his absence, Derek appeared more confident than ever. As the conversation continued, Eleanor gently reminded the family that relationships mattered more than money. The statement should have ended the discussion. Instead, it seemed to aggravate Derek even further. He leaned forward in his chair. The smile disappeared completely. For a brief moment, an uncomfortable silence settled across the dining hall. Tasha felt it immediately. So did everyone else. The laughter was gone. The celebration suddenly felt fragile. From her position beside the service table, Tasha watched Eleanor maintain her dignity while tension slowly built around her. She remembered the warning Eleanor had given days earlier about certain family members caring more about wealth than people. Looking at Derek now, Tasha finally understood exactly what she meant. And somewhere deep inside, a feeling she could not explain began telling her that before the night was over, something important was about to happen. The silence around the dining table grew heavier with every passing minute. What had begun as a birthday celebration now felt like a meeting nobody wanted to attend. Crystal glasses remained untouched. Conversations had stopped. Even the staff moving around the room seemed careful not to make unnecessary noise. Derek Moretti sat rigidly in his chair, his frustration becoming more visible each time Eleanor calmly disagreed with him. Unlike Derek, Eleanor never raised her voice. She simply stated her opinions with the confidence that came from experience and wisdom. Yet that quiet confidence appeared to bother him more than open opposition ever could. "You are refusing to see reality," Derek finally said. Several family members immediately looked down at their plates. Eleanor remained composed. "No, Derek," she replied gently. "I simply believe family should never be treated like a business transaction." The words landed heavily. Derek leaned back in his chair and forced a smile that failed to reach his eyes. That kind of thinking belongs in the past. Eleanor folded her hands calmly. Respect never belongs in the past. The room became completely silent. From across the dining hall, Tasha felt her stomach tighten. She was standing beside the service table organizing dessert plates, but her attention remained fixed on the conversation. Something about Derek's expression unsettled her. He was no longer debating. He seemed angry, very angry. Around the table, relatives exchanged nervous glances. Nobody wanted to challenge him. Nobody wanted to escalate the situation. Yet nobody stepped in either. Eleanor sat alone at the center of the storm. Derek suddenly pushed his chair backward and stood. The sound echoed through the room. Several guests jumped slightly. Tasha instinctively looked toward Eleanor. The older woman remained seated, her dignity untouched, but she now appeared saddened rather than frustrated. "Everything I have done has been for this family," Derek said, "and all I receive is criticism." Eleanor shook her head softly. "Nobody is criticizing you. I am asking you to remember what matters." For a brief moment, something flashed across Derek's face. Pride, frustration, embarrassment. Whatever it was, it made Tasha move before she had time to think. As Derek stepped toward Eleanor's side of the table in visible anger, Tasha immediately crossed the room. The movement surprised everyone. 1 second, she was beside the service station. The next, she stood between Eleanor and Derek. Her hands trembled slightly. Her heart pounded. Yet she did not move aside. The entire room froze. Tasha herself could hardly believe what she had done. She was a maid. She was supposed to stay invisible. Yet every instinct inside her had told her that Eleanor should not be left standing alone. Derek stared at her in disbelief. Family members looked equally stunned. No one had ever seen Tasha interrupt anything before, let alone place herself in the middle of a family confrontation. Eleanor looked up at her with surprise and gratitude. For several endless seconds, nobody spoke. Then Derek laughed coldly. "Unbelievable," he muttered. The tension shifted immediately. Suddenly, every eye in the room turned toward Tasha. And although she had acted for only one reason, to protect the only person who had consistently shown her kindness, she could already feel the consequences beginning to gather around her like a storm. Tasha knew the moment she stepped aside that her life inside the Moretti estate had changed. The dinner ended shortly afterward, but the tension lingered long after the guests left the dining hall. Conversations that had once filled the mansion with warmth were replaced by whispers. Employees exchanged glances whenever Tasha passed. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked nervous. Nobody seemed willing to say what they were thinking out loud. The following morning, the consequences arrived faster than she expected. As Tasha organized supplies in a storage room, the estate manager approached with an uncomfortable expression. "I need you to come with me," he said quietly. Tasha immediately sensed something was wrong. Minutes later, she sat across from him in a small office near the service entrance. The manager avoided eye contact as he reviewed a document on his desk. Finally, he sighed. "A complaint was filed regarding your behavior at last night's dinner." Tasha stared at him. "My behavior? Several family members claim you disrupted a private family matter." The words felt unreal. She opened her mouth to explain, then stopped. What explanation could she possibly give? Everyone in the room had seen what happened. Yet somehow the story had already begun changing. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "Until everything is reviewed, you are being temporarily suspended from duties." The sentence landed like a weight in her chest. Tasha nodded slowly. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply accepted the decision and quietly left the office. By afternoon, rumors had spread throughout the estate. Some employees claimed Tasha had embarrassed an important family member. Others suggested she had overstepped her position. The truth seemed to matter less than the story people preferred to tell. As she packed a small box of personal belongings from her locker, several workers watched from a distance. Nobody offered help. Nobody spoke up. The same people who had laughed at her mistakes now looked relieved that someone else had become the center of attention. Only one person came looking for her. Eleanor found Tasha sitting alone on a bench near the garden. Autumn leaves drifted across the pathway as the older woman slowly approached. "I heard what happened," Eleanor said softly. Tasha managed a small smile. "It is only temporary." Eleanor sat beside her. "You were trying to help me." Tasha looked down at her hands. "I did not even think about it. I just saw you standing there alone." For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Eleanor gently reached over and squeezed her hand. "Most people saw risk and stayed silent," she said. "You saw a person." Tasha felt tears threaten to appear, but quickly blinked them away. Across the estate, expensive cars continued arriving and departing. Family members carried on with their lives. Derek walked through the mansion with complete confidence, behaving as though the matter had already been settled in his favor. Yet as Eleanor sat beside Tasha in the quiet garden, a different truth remained hidden beneath the surface. The woman everyone called Clumsy had lost her job for doing the right thing. And somewhere far from the estate, Vincent Moretti was finally on his way home. The private jet landed just after sunset. Vincent Moretti stepped onto the runway carrying the exhaustion of 3 days filled with meetings, negotiations, and endless responsibilities. During the drive back to the estate, he expected updates about business matters, upcoming projects, and family guests. Instead, the first thing he heard was a brief mention of an incident at his mother's birthday dinner. The estate manager delivered the information carefully, choosing his words with obvious caution. By the time the car passed through the mansion gates, Vincent's expression had become unreadable. He listened without interruption as the manager explained that a maid named Tasha Brooks had been suspended following a complaint filed by several family members. Vincent frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar. "Why was she suspended?" he asked. The manager hesitated. "She intervened during a disagreement involving your mother and Mr. Derek Moretti." Vincent slowly turned his head. "Intervened how?" The manager looked uncomfortable. "The details are disputed." Vincent said nothing more. He simply stared out the window as the mansion appeared ahead. Inside, family members continued enjoying the final days of their visit. Derek seemed especially relaxed. He moved through the estate with the confidence of someone who believed the matter had already been settled. What Derek did not know was that Vincent had inherited many qualities from his mother. One of them was a dislike for incomplete stories. Less than an hour after arriving home, Vincent visited Eleanor. He found her sitting in her favorite sunroom wrapped in a light blanket while reading beside the window. The moment she saw him, her face brightened. Yet after their embrace, Vincent immediately noticed something else. Disappointment. Not in him. In something that had happened. They spoke for several minutes before he finally asked about the dinner. Eleanor set her book aside. Tasha was punished for doing the right thing, she said quietly. Vincent listened carefully as his mother described the evening. She did not exaggerate. She did not accuse. She simply explained what she had witnessed. When she finished, silence settled between them. Vincent remained thoughtful for several seconds. And Tasha never defended herself. Eleanor shook her head. Not once. Vincent stood and walked toward the window. Outside, estate lights illuminated the gardens where autumn leaves drifted across the pathways. Where is she now? He asked. At home, I imagine. Eleanor smiled sadly, probably wondering why kindness costs so much. Those words stayed with him. Later that evening, Vincent entered the security office beneath the main wing of the mansion. Rows of monitors illuminated the room in soft blue light. A technician immediately stood when he entered. Pull footage from the dining hall during the birthday dinner, Vincent said calmly. The technician nodded and began searching the archives. Minutes later, the recording appeared on the screen. Vincent watched everything unfold from beginning to end. He saw the conversation. He saw Derek's growing frustration. He saw relatives lowering their eyes. Most importantly, he saw Tasha cross the room and place herself between his mother and a situation everyone else had been too afraid to approach. When the footage ended, the room fell silent. Vincent stared at the screen for a long moment. His expression never changed. Then he turned toward the technician. Make copies of everything. The technician swallowed nervously. Yes, sir. Vincent nodded once and walked out of the room. Across the estate, Derek continued believing he had won. Across the city, Tasha believed she had lost her job. Neither of them realized that. Vincent Moretti had just learned the truth, and when Vincent learned the truth, he never forgot it. The next 2 days were strangely quiet. That alone made people nervous. Inside the Moretti estate, everyone expected Vincent to react immediately after returning home. Instead, he said very little. He attended meetings, spoke with family members, reviewed documents, and carried on as though nothing unusual had happened. Derek interpreted the silence as victory. Each hour that passed seemed to strengthen his confidence. He laughed more openly. He spoke more boldly. By the second evening, he was already discussing future plans with several relatives, as though the unpleasant incident had been permanently buried. Yet beneath the calm surface, Vincent was paying attention to everything. He spoke privately with employees who had been present during the birthday dinner. He reviewed additional reports. He listened more than he talked. The answers he received were remarkably consistent. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone knew why Tasha stepped forward. Yet very few people had been willing to admit it publicly when the pressure began. Meanwhile, across town, Tasha spent her suspension in a small apartment she shared with her younger cousin. She tried to remain positive, but uncertainty followed her everywhere. Every morning, she checked her phone. Every afternoon, she wondered whether she should begin searching for another job. The Moretti estate had been more than employment. It had been stability, opportunity, a place where she hoped to build a future. Now all of that felt fragile. The only bright spot came from Eleanor. The older woman called her every day. Sometimes they talked about books. Sometimes they discussed gardening. Neither spent much time discussing the suspension itself. Yet Eleanor always ended every conversation with the same sentence. Do not lose faith in yourself. On the third morning, Vincent invited his mother to breakfast. Sunlight filled the private dining room as they sat together overlooking the gardens. After several minutes of casual conversation, Eleanor finally asked the question she had been carrying for days. What are you going to do? Vincent stirred his coffee thoughtfully. The truth deserves witnesses. Eleanor smiled faintly. She knew that tone. Vincent had already made a decision. Later that afternoon, invitations were delivered throughout the estate. Family members were informed that Vincent wished to hold a private gathering the following evening before everyone returned home. The request immediately sparked curiosity. Nobody knew the purpose of the meeting. Derek appeared especially pleased. Several relatives assumed Vincent intended to restore harmony within the family after the recent tension. Derek even joked that perhaps everyone was finally ready to move on. By sunset the following day, guests once again gathered inside the grand dining hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room just as they had during Eleanor's birthday celebration. Family members took their seats. Conversations filled the air. Derek arrived wearing a confident smile. Then Vincent entered. The room immediately fell silent. His expression revealed nothing. He greeted no one. He carried only a small folder beneath one arm. Slowly he walked to the head of the table and looked around the room. Every face turned toward him. Every voice disappeared. And somewhere far away, completely unaware of what was about to happen, Tasha Brooks sat at home believing the story was over when in reality, it was only beginning. The silence inside the dining hall felt almost unbearable. Every member of the Moretti family watched Vincent as he stood at the head of the table, holding the small folder. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody dared. Derek remained relaxed, leaning comfortably in his chair as though he had nothing to worry about. Vincent slowly looked around the room before speaking. A few days ago, a member of this family filed a complaint that resulted in the suspension of an employee. His voice was calm, controlled. That employee was accused of interfering in a private family matter. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably. Derek folded his arms. Vincent opened the folder and removed a document. Before making any decisions, I reviewed the facts. The room became even quieter. Vincent nodded toward a large screen, mounted on the far wall. Moments later, security footage appeared. The recording began playing. Every eye turned toward the screen. The room watched the birthday dinner unfold exactly as it had happened. There was no narration, no interpretation, only truth. They saw Eleanor speaking calmly. They saw Derek becoming increasingly frustrated. They saw relatives looking away rather than intervening. Then they saw Tasha cross the room and place herself between Eleanor and the growing confrontation. Nobody spoke as the footage continued. The images said everything. By the time the recording ended, the atmosphere inside the room had completely changed. Derek's confidence was gone. Several relatives stared at the table. Others looked visibly embarrassed. Vincent allowed the silence to linger. Then he spoke again. The employee did not create a problem. His eyes settled briefly on Derek. She responded to one. No one argued. No one could. The evidence was undeniable. Vincent removed a second item from the folder. It was a handwritten letter. There is something else you should hear. He unfolded the page and began reading. The letter came from Eleanor. She had written it the previous day. In careful handwriting, she described how Tasha had spent the last year helping her, reading with her in the evenings, bringing tea when she was unwell, sitting with her during difficult days, listening when loneliness became heavy. Small acts, quiet acts, acts no one else had noticed. As Vincent continued reading, several family members looked stunned. They had never known. Derek looked away. Eleanor sat silently at the far end of the table, her eyes glistening with emotion. When Vincent finished, he placed the letter back inside the folder. The room remained completely silent. Then he delivered the final truth. The woman some of you mocked for being clumsy showed more courage than everyone else in this room. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the staff standing near the walls seemed frozen. Vincent's gaze swept across the table. She protected my mother when others chose comfort over character. The words landed heavily. Derek opened his mouth as though searching for a defense. None came. For the first time all week, he appeared genuinely uncertain. Vincent closed the folder and set it on the table. His expression never changed. Yet everyone present understood something important. The story they had built around Tasha Brooks was about to collapse, and the judgment they thought had already been delivered was only now beginning. The following morning, Tasha awoke expecting another day of uncertainty. She had no idea that everything had changed the night before. While she sat at her small kitchen table drinking coffee and searching through job listings, her phone rang. The caller ID displayed the Moretti estate. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. Then she answered. The estate manager's voice sounded completely different from their last conversation. Miss Brooks, Mr. Moretti would like you to come to the estate this afternoon. Tasha blinked in confusion. Am I in trouble? A brief pause followed. No, Miss Brooks. Quite the opposite. Hours later, she arrived at the mansion feeling nervous and completely unprepared for what awaited her. The moment she entered the grand foyer, she noticed something unusual. Employees who normally offered only polite greetings were smiling at her. Some even stopped to speak. Others nodded respectfully as she passed. Tasha could not understand why. An attendant escorted her to the main dining hall. When the doors opened, she froze. The room was filled with family members, senior staff, and employees from across the estate. At the front stood Vincent beside Eleanor. Every conversation stopped the moment Tasha entered. Her first instinct was to turn around and leave. Instead, she slowly stepped forward. Vincent addressed the room. A few days ago, this woman was punished for doing the right thing. Silence settled over the crowd. Tasha looked around, stunned. Vincent continued. She was judged without fairness, criticized without truth, and treated as though her courage was a mistake. Several relatives lowered their eyes. Derek remained silent near the back of the room. Vincent then did something nobody expected. He walked toward Tasha and extended his hand. "Thank you for protecting my mother." The room seemed to stop breathing. Tasha stared at him, unable to find words. Vincent was not finished. He turned toward the gathered employees and family members. For months, many of you laughed at her mistakes. A few uncomfortable expressions appeared throughout the crowd. You called her clumsy. You called her a disaster. Yet when character was required, she was the only person willing to step forward. No one challenged him. No one could. Eleanor approached and gently embraced Tasha. Tears filled the older woman's eyes. "You reminded everyone what kindness looks like," she whispered. Then Vincent announced the final surprise. Effective immediately, Tasha's suspension was canceled, her record cleared, and she was being offered a new position overseeing the family's charitable outreach programs, working directly with Eleanor on community initiatives. Gasps spread through the room. The woman who had been mocked only days earlier was now being entrusted with one of the most respected roles connected to the family. Tasha could barely speak. Around her, employees began applauding. One by one, others joined until the entire room was filled with applause. Some people stood. Others smiled through tears. Even those who had once laughed at her seemed ashamed of their past behavior. Tasha looked around the room in disbelief. She had not sought recognition. She had not asked for rewards. She had simply done what she believed was right. Yet somehow that simple choice had changed everything. Vincent glanced toward his mother, then back toward Tasha. A faint smile appeared on his face. The room gradually grew quiet again. And on that day, the woman they once called the walking disaster became the person everyone respected most. The room went silent. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks like.